And you may also begin, I don't want to close that, I want to reduce that. Um, I was able to turn off my camera device in my OBS. My OBS was trying to use my camera. That might have been why Skype is having a hard time. Um, I shut my camera off and then I turn it back on in Skype, and there it is. It worked.
Yeah.
It
Ah,
worked.
well,
Oh,
All right, very good. So I am recording, and at least you can see me in the little corner. I don't know how big I am on your end, but I got a little tiny view of myself up there. Um,
I've got a tiny view and two big ones for you guys.
oh, so
So,
you see this. So you have your own little. What you see is yourself in the corner, same as I do. Okay, very good. All right, great. And my audio seems to be picking me up just as well as you, so you guys can begin your recordings, and we can get started in a second when you're ready.
we're both recording. Oh, I don't know how it works on Skype, but Skype's got a record button, so I just press record.
Okay. You'll just have to figure out where it puts the recording somewhere on your computer in one of the files.
And
yeah.
You'll just have
You
to,
get
when you're,
on Zoom it usually goes into the sort of the downloads.
yeah,
right,
yeah, it'll
Yeah.
probably be in your download folder or something like that. You'll just have to figure out where Skype puts it when the recording is over.
sure.
All right, very good. So, welcome everybody. This is going to be like a Conwick supplement show. I have with me my friend Pauline. Become very good friends with her on our Discord, and I have Dr. Bruce Scott with us, and he is a um, pardon me. It just escaped my brain. Dr. Scott, why don't you just go ahead and give us your background so I don't screw it up, and then
What am I? I am what I am. That sounds very typical. Well, originally I trained as a psychologist, research psychologist in academic. I did an undergraduate degree and then a PhD looking at cognition and depression and the effects of SSRI antidepressants like Prozac. And I became kind of, well, it wasn't really my thing. I couldn't see myself working in academic psychology, which, 20 odd years later, maybe what we've got to touch on today probably is relevant. But then I trained as a psychoanalyst in London at a place called the Philadelphia Association, which was set up by the famous Scottish psychiatrist and psychoanalyst R.D. Laing. And he was kind of very critical of psychiatry and the treatment that people got. He was very much associated with the counterculture, and of course that as well has its issues. But essentially, yeah, I work now as a psychoanalyst privately, and I do a bit of writing here and there. So there you go.
so your PhD is in psychoanalytics.
Now, my PhD was looking at the cognitive model of depression. I was looking at unconscious and conscious information processing with people who are depressed, and also looking at how people who take antidepressant medication like Prozac, Seroxat, that class of antidepressants called SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and my interest in that was like, this is over 20 years ago I did this, but my interest in that was a lot of people who took antidepressants, they seem to relapse very, very quickly after stopping the treatment. And my research, which I never carried on with, but it was very interesting. I found that basically people who were on antidepressants for 6 months, their conscious symptoms and their self-report measures of depressive symptoms became the same as someone who's not depressed, but unconsciously they still processed information. They still had a very not a negative self-esteem, so to speak, but a less positive self-esteem than non-depressed people. Uh, Essentially, so it was very interesting. So essentially, at an unconscious level, the flaw, or not flaw, it's a terrible word, but the issue going on for depressed people isn't really resolved at an unconscious level, if you want to say. And of course, there's lots of studies look at the effect psychoanalysis or even cognitive therapy, but that's problematic as well. But people who have talking therapy, e.g., they meet another person in a room for quite a period of time, that is what heals people. It's quite debatable of the method of therapy that one would use, but it's essentially the relationship that, and it's an ancient idea of two people sitting in a room thrashing out what's going on for their life. Whether
God
one
forbid.
wants to, yeah. Well, essentially,
God forbid two people sit in a room these days.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the Scottish Government have come out with a new paper for the future, or vision, and I put it on social media and Twitter, and essentially they're advising people, because it's very much orientated towards the climate crisis. It's all about socialise on Zoom rather than in person. So we've had 2 years of COVID restrictions where people have isolated and not met their family or friends, or not went to the funerals, or not went to weddings. And now they're coming out with, what would be a great idea? Let's encourage socializing on Zoom. I mean, and I put on social media, I said, whoever's thought about this idea and put out at this moment in time, there's something sick.
I was telling Aaron last night, we were going over what our interview would be about, and I was mentioning how you and I met, Bruce.
Yeah.
That I ran a counselling and psychotherapy centre, and you hired a room from me, and I think I had over 60 clients, and I think as far as I know, there's only 3 of us who are awake to what's going on, and that blows my mind, and that it immediately went to Zoom. So what you were highlighting is the relationship has now become an online thing, which there's no human contact in it,
Yeah. So we met because you were running this place where I hired the room, and it's surprising how so many therapists and psychologists in the mental health world have completely bought this. There's only one person in our circle who we both know, and there's a group called Medical Therapists for Medical Freedom, and so it's growing, but generally speaking, it's incredible. And where was I going with this?
Let me interrupt you for a second, and more of an interjection that might help your thought process. Just very recently, in the last few days, I was observing a interview on a channel that anybody can find on Odyssey called Germ Warfare. The guy's name is Jeremy, and it was just an old high school nickname that he adopted, so he calls himself Germ. He's had this podcast way longer than the COVID thing, so his podcast is called Germ Warfare, which is oddly appropriate. But anyway, very recently he interviewed Matthias Desmet and also Peter McCullough at the same time. And Germ was asking, or perhaps Peter asked, how is it that so many intellectuals, really genuinely smart people, are just buying this narrative hook, line, and sinker, which is where you were about to allude to before I interrupted you. So Matthias Desmet responded saying that generally what you'll find in the higher educated people, because they have gone through all of the academic training, that their mentality is, and their training is so focused, is so laser focused on a particular subject or topic, that they have more of a hard time thinking outside of their academic training. So that might help with what you were about to explain.
Well, that reason, it's possible, I suppose. The education system, you get a lot of educated fools in the world, and just because you've got a PhD or you're a lecturer at university, it doesn't mean one is able to think outside the box. I say from my experience in academia, you know, psychologists, I don't think are particularly prone towards moral or ethical feelings of acting in the world, in an ethical or moral way. They're quite cutthroat. They want their career, they want the salary. They don't want to rock the boat. They're as much. I mean, because they're human beings. I'm sorry about the dog barking there. They they are as much prone to conformity, and they. I think also as well, they essentially, in our society, which is essentially, well, the god of science, a lot of people go into psychology because they see that as their god, essentially. Uh, I think that they're on a groundlessness, essentially, and so to go along with the status quo, with the state, so to speak, the narrative, they're quite willing to do that. They're quite willing to sell their souls for it, and they have this need to be needed. They're not brave enough to step out of it. They're not brave enough to speak up. They've no courage, and I think a lot of the psychologists I met have very little courage, essentially.
I can attest to that, having worked for decades with them. I've never found them particularly evolved people, to be honest. It depends what your 40 is, but you can. I mean, my boss and I, Tracy, remember Tracy? We used to talk about how problematic they were, and how, because they wanted everything just so and things like that. And remember early on in this process when I invited you to do a talk for our Cordia, I ran a little charity as well of therapists, and every year we had an AGM and we invited a speaker, and we invited Bruce was it 2020?
It was it was like Christmassy time 2020, wasn't it?
That's right, and October.
Yeah.
Bruce came on. It had to take place on Zoom, of course. We couldn't meet in person and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And Bruce came on and did a fantastic talk, and it was based on Bolshevism, right? So it was like around that idea, and they refused to. They recorded it, and they refused to put it on our website because it was too political. You used the word COVID 1984.
Well,
Yeah.
you can't mock the narrative, that's for sure. That's not allowed. In reference to what we were speaking about a moment ago about how academics have a tendency to be more focused, and it's surprising that so many of them are buying into this narrative, and for some obvious reasons, like you said, they're human beings too. They have egos, they have families, they have salaries, and they want to protect their futures and their money and all, reputations and things like that. So that comes into play. I saw you raise your hand. Did you want to?
Yeah, I'll just this. Could I just stop this dog barking for 2 seconds?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't bother me, but go right ahead.
Yeah, we can edit. We can edit.
All right. Oh, 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Oh yeah.
It must be louder for him than it is for me. It wasn't bothering me.
Yeah, me either. I was
Yeah.
fine. I noticed he's got a guitar in the background. You know what I've noticed, Pauline, with so many people that I follow that are, good researchers, and people who are good at thinking outside the box and seeing through various narratives. And this has been going on in my mind for many years, long before the COVID thing came along. I've noticed that people like that tend to be musicians, very often guitar players. You almost always see a guitar in the background, like particularly like right off the top of my head, James Corbett, for instance.
Yeah.
He's got a little guitar in his back, and I listen to Richie Allen quite often. Richie
Yep.
has on a few occasions described how he is learning how to play guitar, and um, I just I just noticed guitars in the backgrounds of so many, researchers and journalists and video producers who are doing like what we're doing, seeing through the narrative.
Bruce also plays a very unusual instrument. Bruce, what's that instrument, that other instrument that you play?
Oh, this is the Duke. It's
Ah,
Armenian. I won't play it now.
yeah, it's got an amazing sound. We were just talking about, Aaron was just saying that a lot of people who are um, critical thinkers and awake are musicians as well. So
Uh-huh.
yeah.
I've
Uh-huh.
noticed a striking amount of the people that I follow who talk about the subjects that we're talking about here, and like she said, critical thinkers. Almost always, I see a guitar leaning in the background. I was noticing your guitar when you got up and walked away.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I suppose somebody like Carl Jung, who's problematic because he was an occultist and Satanist, but but he would say that you have balance of certain aspects of your personality. I mean, to be too analytical and rational in scientific minded wise, would be an unbalance, and one would have to have another thing like art or
Yeah.
beauty or some sort of
I
to
remember I remember learning many years ago that people who play music, especially when you start at a young age, what it does is it helps the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere communicate better. For
hmm
some reason, the act of doing that type of art, in the form of music particularly, but other art as well, but mostly for music, is that it really helps I think what's it called, the corpus callosum, the section where the left and right hemispheres. And I've also heard counter arguments, but I've heard that one side of your brain is more logically focused and the other side of your brain is more emotionally focused. And so when you have the two logic and emotional sides of your brain, if that's true, then having them communicate better with each other, a more, like you said, a more balanced approach. I think that is maybe why so many critical thinkers are musicians, or maybe it's the other way around. So many musicians tend to be critical thinkers.
yeah. Oh no, no. I think they develop to have a more just a less focused or specific education. Uh, must it must. I mean, you look at I've been studying, reading a lot about the ancient Christian church, and of course, before even I suppose people who used to want to go become a priest, they had to have a very wide education in philosophy, humanities, etc. And it was a long process, uh, before you could even get into the realms of spirituality. You had to have a grounding in logic and philosophy and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I think education, so to speak, has been dumbed down to a huge extent. I look at myself and I see there's some aspects of my education. I'm woefully uneducated in so many because of where I grew up, when at the time I grew up,
Mhm.
and you look at what's happening in Scottish schools today. It it's an absolute it's an absolute disaster zone for. They're not they're creating a generation but they won't be able to think properly. They won't be able to see the wood from the trees. Uh, they'll so
Um, are you familiar with John Taylor Gatto?
I am, yes. I've only read I've read one book of him recently actually. I can't remember what it was about, but yeah, his ideas on education. Yeah, very
Um,
good.
I have on my channel, my YouTube channel, I have a short clip from a something like a 3 or plus hour interview that he gave. Um, and it's a 12-minute clip from this interview where he describes the 6 purposes of schooling as
Mhm.
laid down by Alexander Ingalls, who Harvard named their honor lecturer in education. And he managed to get a copy of this honor lecture, or this education lecture given by Ingalls. And then he got I think it was Engel's book, and when he read this book, he said he said it was terribly boring, painfully boring, until you get to the middle of this book where he spills the beans and he says, "Let me spill them for you. The six purposes of schooling are." Well, I won't name the list, but the number one, the very first priority, the reason for schooling is not education, but to create an automatic response to authority.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then there are some other creepier aspects which may even have a whiff of eugenics built into them. And he said that the teachers don't know that they're doing this because it's happened structurally. And then he goes on to say that if you were an educator and that was your goal, was to create an automatic response to authority, he said, how would you test for that? He says you test by giving stupid orders, because people have a natural tendency to follow logical, sensible orders. And when you give people stupid orders and they follow without question, then you can see that you've achieved function number one. And I recall my own high school experience and my own scholastic experience. I was a person who constantly was getting in trouble by questioning authority and asking, why are we doing this? It doesn't make any sense. And that happened to me a lot in school. And it makes absolute perfect sense, the way he describes it, that you would give stupid orders in order to test how successful you were at training people to have just a simple automatic response to authority. And he doesn't mention it, but that automatically made me think of the Milgram experiment and
Yeah.
the Stanford prison experiment, as well as the Ash experiments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
An example would be currently,
yeah,
you walk into a restaurant, everyone's sitting down, doesn't have to wear a mask, but you have to wear it until you sit down.
or go to the restroom as soon as you stand up. It's just like, early on in the pandemic. I know they were doing this in England and Europe. I think they did it in California briefly, where they allowed people to first they closed the beaches, and then a lot of people complained, and there was a big pushback, and so they allowed people to go to the beach. But the rule was you can get exercise, you can walk to the water, you can walk back, you can run and jog on the beach, but you weren't allowed to sit on the beach.
That's
And
right.
and in the UK, it was a similar rule with parks. You can walk and get your exercise in the park, but you can't sit on a bench.
Yeah.
Yeah. I knew a guy in Glasgow. He told me that he knew someone or seen someone getting moved on by the police. He was sitting on a park bench in the park. And this was the same time that they were having all these parties in the UK government buildings in London. The thing that's going on now with Boris Johnson and his wife, Carrie Johnson. And yeah, so they're doing these ridiculous rules. And they're completely flaunting them themselves all the time,
But there is a part of your article where you discussed that. Did you not feel that this is orchestrated and deliberate?
Yeah, which article are you referring to?
The menticide and schizogenesis.
Yeah, and I mentioned it also in another article I wrote about called "The Cult of the Brave New Normal."
Oh,
How
right.
I likened the implementation of weird, arbitrary rules which have no basis in rationality or science. Standing on a spot in a supermarket and wearing a mask, walking to the toilet, having to wear a mask, getting married, and then Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish First Minister, taking it away. Just complete arbitrary with nonsense rules, and that's straight out a cult leader's playbook. And I think the large majority of the population, because they see that their leaders like Nicola Sturgeon as leaders, but also I see them the way they obey, the way it's almost like a cult. Well, it is a cult.
Yeah.
And there's a huge degree of sadomasochism in it, and I think a lot of these leaders are on the sadomasochistic spectrum. I mean, there's rumours that Nicola Sturgeon's a bit of a dominatrix. There's a painting apparently. Well, there is a painting of her dressed as a dominatrix, which was bought by her husband, and it hangs in their house. It was in major newspapers, and it's like, well, she's acting out her sadism on a large scale, and a lot of these leaders do act out their sadism, and they get off in it. Essentially, they get off in it. It's I don't think there's any don't beat around the bush with it. No pun intended.
I think people see that about Sturgeon, and I can also see it in Trudeau. He's actually sexually turned on by the power, right?
Well, I was reading in this book, I was reading about Hitler and fear and Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism. Nazi guards in the concentration camps, who were, they were just brought in to work in the camps. They weren't like any bigwigs or anything, but they trained them up. They indoctrinated them into the whole playbook of it. And one guard, one of the stories she talks about is one of the guards got so turned on by beating up people, and he kept going until he ejaculated.
Oh my God!
This getting into realms of deep sickness here.
Wow.
Yeah, he loved it. Loved beating people up. Loved seeing them, scream for mercy, and so that even made him do it more. I mean, this ability for people to go to that place, the terribly dark place of punishing people, of getting pleasure out of it, giving them some sort of meaning in the life. I mean, one of my first jobs was in a high security forensic mental hospital in Scotland. And I met some people who'd done some terrible crimes against children, men, women, murders, etc., etc. And some of the people that I met, they ventured to some very, very dark place where there's no the moral compass was completely broken. Their existence or meaning was just purely another human being was there for pleasure or fun or amusement. And if death was even the screams of begging mercy from one of their victims, for example, that was like music to their ears. So I mean, these politicians, when it's all got to come out in the wash, this COVID 1984, when the deaths have been counted, how many deaths have these politicians, or how many people are they responsible for? Mm-hmm. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon, right? I never believed that any of the politicians, they choose their words very carefully.
Yeah.
Pfizer came out with the thing that there is a clear link, a warning signal. Many other studies have shown it, of myocarditis, pericarditis with the vaccine, and blood clots and things like that. And for many months, they've been trying to get the approval for vaccines for children. And when it was announced by the UK government that the vaccine was okay for children, Nicola Sturgeon stood in Parliament and she said, it makes her heart sing. And I believe, it made her heart sing. I believe those words were chosen deliberately. That's what a sort of thing a sadist would do. They know fine well the data, they know fine the research. To stand into the Scottish Parliament and say, it makes my heart sing that children will be vaccinated. And then, of course, there's all these, and especially in America, the loads of reports of children developing myocarditis and pericarditis. And yet no concern has been raised in Scotland by hardly anyone about this risk for children. It's nightmarish when you look at it. I think in black and white in all its different angles. I think to say such a thing, and then of course she also said she said that people who don't get vaccinated, they are irresponsible and selfish.
That's right.
I mean, what, an abhorrent thing to say, I mean, she's a very dark character, I think. And the fact that she masks children in schools. One of the most draconian rules in the whole thing is the masking of children, I think.
Yeah.
And she's adamant she wants to keep masks on children, and she wants to keep masks for adults as well for the long term.
So that Aaron knows, we have never had a break on the mask mandate. It's Scotland has never dropped it, and she has now come out and said it will continue for 6 years. Another
6 years?
Yeah, 6 years.
Wow.
That's what she said a couple of days ago.
Well, I really feel for you guys. I have not put a mask on one single time throughout this entire event. I'll take that. I'll take that back. I did wear a mask for about 2 minutes when I had to visit my mother in the hospital. But once I was in her room, they were okay. I could take my mask off. But I had to wear a mask walking through the empty hospital, very, very quiet, empty hospital. So that was literally the only time.
Yeah.
And I'm actually lucky. I live in Georgia, and we're considered a red state, or mostly Republican. And most of the red states in this country have not put forward any particularly strong or stringent rules, especially when it comes to like masks. And I do remember that early on, it was announced by the big chain stores, Walmart, Home Depot, I think Target, a couple of others, almost on the same day when they announced that it'll be their policy required that you have a mask when you go into their store. They very quietly, all of them, at the same time, also put out a statement that it wouldn't be enforced.
Wow.
So they're talking out both sides of their mouth. They'll come out publicly and they'll make a literal physical public statement. Okay, masks, and then they'll put up signs in the front of the store. Masks are required, right? And so you walk in without a mask, and or at least around here, nobody says a word to you. And the only time I've ever gotten a hard time was when I had to go to the bank. The bank was particularly strict with their mask policy, but I still never wore one. And I had many experiences just arguing with this security guard until the manager would come over and basically tell him to leave me alone. But other than that, I'm pretty lucky around here. It's not as stringent as you describe in Scotland. Certainly not as bad as Canada, and definitely not as bad as Australia. So I'm kind of lucky in that way. So I wanted to ask Bruce. Let's start with this idea of learned helplessness. Someone in your position should be able to describe that very well for the audience. And also closely associated with that is infantilism. So that might help people understand why so many people around them are just going lockstep along with these arbitrary, nonsensical, unscientific rules that are in place.
Yeah. Well, as I wrote about in a couple of articles, I touched upon the idea of behaviorism and the idea of Pavlov and his dogs. I was referring. Where is the book? Where is the book? It was Dr. Solokov's. Here it is. Sorry, I'll just get it here. This is. I don't know if you can see that.
Yep.
Yeah. Boris Solokov, he was a doctor in Russia during the Russian Revolution and a survivor of a prison camp. And so he talks about his experiences around about the time. And he visited Pavlov's laboratory in Russia. I can't remember precisely if he met Pavlov, but he met one of the laboratory workers, certainly. And you had these perfectly healthy dogs, and they got them. And through a series of conditioning experiments and punishments, rewards, they found quite easily. He was showing some dogs there, and they turned basically very normal, healthy, happy dogs like my dog, turned them into neurotic, nervous, very ill dogs, and so essentially that is a state. They turned these dogs into a state of learned helplessness. And what they also found was that not only were they psychically, so to speak, if you can call a dog's psyche, and dogs are very intelligent, but they were also they found that a lot of physical health conditions resulted from the stress, because it was like the magnitude of stress and the amount of stress which leads to this kind of state of learned helplessness and mental breakdown. And this, and I talk about it in terms of the Dutch psychoanalyst and psychiatrist Just Merleau in his book, The Rape of the Mind. And he talks about in terms of the propaganda, the fear propaganda and the terror. They have like waves of fear, like, oh, we've got to lock down for 3 weeks to flatten the curve, and then they ease up, and then we're going to have Christmas, and then there's no Christmas. So these waves, alternative waves of hope and fear, and all the other messages coming in the media at the same time, but they're often contradictory. So you got one chief medical officer saying things like, "We'll have Christmas. It looks looking good," and the health secretary of the UK government will say it's not looking good. So people are bombarded with conflicting messages, and that is essentially Pavlovianism in operation in real time through this pandemic the last 2 years. It makes people into a state of learned helplessness. They don't know where to turn to. They don't know whether to plan. They don't know whether to go out. They don't know who to believe.
Right.
It is essentially psychological warfare, and deliberate.
Absolutely. In fact, it reminds me of there's a fairly famous quote by the ex-CIA director William Casey, who's quoted as saying, when everything the American people believe is false, our disinfo campaign will be complete.
Yeah.
And I've also heard from some other learned people, as I listen to lectures and interviews. I forget who said it. It might have been Dr. McCullough, or it might have been Dr. Malone, or it might have been Sherry I think it was Sherry Tenpenny, and others who have been told by ex-military people that what we're experiencing right now is literally military-grade psychological operations.
Yeah. Yeah. There's lots of different ways to discuss it. Pavlovianism. Matthias Desmet has talked about mass formation psychosis based on the work of Gustave Le Bon. There's also, I've discussed it in terms of I've seen it very early on. I've seen it in terms of, I work clinically with people in my practice. I work a lot with people who are in domestic abuse sort of situations. And I looked at all these regulations, like stopping people working, stopping people meeting friends, stopping people going to traveling, restrictions on all that. And I heard that, and I just thought to myself, well, that's just domestic abuse, but on a huge scale.
Yeah.
The government being, the mother, the father, or not the mother, the father, but the
parental figure,
partner, or the abusive partner in a relationship, like Nicola Sturgeon, or saying like, you can't do this, you can't do that, but you can get your freedoms back. There's a guy, Jonathan Van Tam. He's one of the medical advisors for the UK government. Domestic abusers give promises. If you do this, then you'll get your freedoms back. And I can't remember which article it was in, but I reread some of my articles before I came on today. And he said something along the lines of, if you take the vaccine, then you'll get your freedoms back. But of course, people did take the vaccine. haven't got their freedoms back.
Yeah.
Domestic abusers do exactly the same thing. They promise, oh, if you don't go and see your friends, I'll love you, and we can be together. And so the victim will go along with that. And then when they don't go and see their friends, the situation doesn't improve.
Yeah.
And so that's where we are.
Is that what you meant by pernicious schizogenesis?
The schizogenesis is related to the learned. Another way of thinking about learned helplessness in psychoanalysis, or in the sort of the genesis of mental illness in children. For example, say you have an abusive parent or a psychopathic parent, and they don't really care for their child very much, and they're quite sadistic with their child. And you can get sadistic mothers and you can get sadistic fathers. Often sadistic mothers, in R.D. Laing's work, the psychiatrist, he talks about this in terms of the mother will say to the child, come and give me a hug. And the child will go over and approach and give them a hug. But the mother's very rigid. And the child can sense that something's not quite right. They're not really getting a hug. And then they'll pull away, and the mother will know what's going on. She'll go, what's wrong? Don't you love me? What can the child say at that moment? Well, yes, I do love you. You're my mother. Good, because why wouldn't I not love you? And that creates in the child, because they haven't got the cognitive capabilities to know, and or that they do know. It's so horrific and terrifying to realise that they've got a psychotic mother. They can't admit that, so they shut off, and essentially they become, this state of learned helplessness, or even psychotic themselves. R.D. Laing talks about it in terms of the child becomes schizophrenic. It can't articulate the horror that they're witnessing. So they embody this madness of the family, and of course. The government, with their, if you do this, you're doing it for the greater good, and if you take the vaccine, we'll give you your freedom, and then when it doesn't happen, adults are just as susceptible to this schizogenesis as well, and so you end up with a lot of people going around society who. They can't admit to the fact they've been duped. It's too terrifying to think about for them. I mean, they're terrified as it is with the threat of dying from the virus, but then to admit that they've been manipulated by their dear leader, who they love, where can they go?
I see a lot of comments under Nicola Sturgeon's posts thanking her. Thank you for being better than Boris. Or thank you for keeping us safe. I'm so glad I live in Scotland.
That's Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
So before we go on, I took a little note. When you brought up Matthias Desmet, as he describes the mass formation psychosis, I just wanted to let you know, if you weren't aware, on multiple occasions, Matthias Desmet, in 2 recent interviews, one with Peter McCullough on germ warfare that I mentioned, and another, I forget the host of the podcast, but Desmet was on simultaneously with Robert Malone. In both of those interviews, Desmet said that he prefers not to attach the word psychosis to the mass formation hypothesis because it's a diagnosis. It's a diagnostic term, and it has quite a stigma attached to it, and so he really prefers to just use mass formation full stop and without the addition of the psychosis when referring to it. So I just wanted to let you know of that.
Sorry.
Well, yes, it's an interesting one. Can one, is it offensive to, is it a sort of offensive term perhaps? He might regard it as offensive. Diagnostic term, well, I mean, the diagnosis of psychosis as a psychiatric idea is dubious enough as it is. But the kind of reality, that the psychic reality that it reflects is very real, I think. The people are disconnected in a fundamental way from language and from the reality of who they are in the world, their own sovereignty, so to speak. That they don't have to obey rules from the god of science. So in a sense, there is a sort of psychoticness, so to speak. I think it's there. A lot of the PSYOP discussion of the PSYOP in terms of critique of the COVID-1984, I get the sense sometimes it's watered down to make it more palatable. And people like Laura Dodsworth, who's written the book The State of Fear. I mean, she's quite openly discusses things like the vaccine rollout was a success, but then criticises the use of psychology making people fearful. Well, why would you need a vaccine rollout so urgently if there was no need to be fearful? It's kind of contradictory message. Mm-hmm. And then it's all about, we should really have a debate about the use of psychology by the government, how it's used upon the population. And it's like, well, no, because it's these people should essentially, ideally anyways, be arrested because they're deliberately making us mentally disturbed. Yeah. It's not a case of let's have a sit down and chat about how we're going to use this psychology stuff for the future. No, you don't. You don't just do this to the population and think you can get away with it. And of course, in her book, which went, bestseller on Amazon and all that, and she was feted in the mainstream media, the psychologist in the book talked about these are like professors of academic departments and people who work for the government, the behavioural insights team, talking about how they lay in bed at night and suddenly realised maybe the tactics that we're using on the population might be a bit unethical, a little bit too hard. Well, from my experience, it isn't possible for that situation to occur because when I did my PhD and I was in academic departments, I had to go through departmental ethics and I had to go through medical ethics committees in an NHS trust. It is so stringent. I mean, it's very difficult to get undergraduate students to press buttons on a computer screen to teddy bears and to pictures of lizards. You know what I mean? Without the department going, will the students be traumatized with that? Maybe you'll have to watch how they might get upset. So alter this part of the experiment. So these professional psychologists in the UK government and all the other governments in the world who have suddenly in Laura Dodsworth's book and other people talking about the PSYOP, there's no possible way they could have not realised what they were doing was unethical. It was completely it was like a no from the start, and I think that they were completely disingenuous, and they were going out to make us psychotic. Essentially, this is why. Why shy away from it? Because they're deliberately trying to make us psychotic. They're deliberately trying to make us disintegrate psychically, to be disorientated from our own very being. And I wrote about it in my latest article on my own website, which I will know, and I won't go into detail about it, but Pauline knows about it. But I couldn't get this published anywhere, not even in the alternative media. Mm-hmm. That says something.
Yeah.
I couldn't get it published. No one would publish it. But so I opened my own website and created an own website and put it up there. And I think it's probably one of the best ones I've written. But I wrote a footnote to this art. This is on my website, Borderline, and this is the Beyond a State of Fear, Menticide and Schizogenesis. And at the bottom of there's a footnote, and it was a webinar on the British Psychological Society website, which was recorded on the 7th of May 2020, and it featured Professor Susan Michie of one of the psychologists working with SAGE, and Catherine Scott, who's the director of policy of the British Psychological Society. And it clearly showed that the public were being deceived and lied to by the UK government about what was taking place. The psychologists in the webinar discussed how immunity passports were being discussed prior to May 2020 and on SAGE, and that the public were being manipulated, unawares, without informed consent, for a behaviour change to a new normal, which indicated that there was no intention even then that old freedoms were going to be returned. This indicates that the psychologists in Dodsworth's book were not being truthful about the extent of what they knew and the plans of the UK government. Yeah. So it's impossible they didn't know what was going on. This is before May 2020.
Well, we also know about the trials and exercises that were performed, like the Rockefeller Lockstep document and the Event 201 Planning Committee, that they were well aware of how they were going to have to arbitrate the internet and censor dissenting voices and how they were going to get people to go along. So I completely agree with you that it's not possible that they didn't or don't know what they have done and what they're doing. It's just not possible.
Yeah, it's a complete cover up. So to say maybe we should look at how psychology is used, that is just it's a way to control the counter narrative to what the COVID-1984, I think, to smooth things over. To say that, we have to have a discussion about this, whether we were driven mad or not by psychological tactics, only a slave would say that.
Yeah.
It's kind of reinforcing the idea that we're slaves to this. We have to have this in our lives.
Yeah.
Why? Why do we need to have psychological operations in our lives?
Wow. So I want to tell you a short story, and I want you to try to see if you can help me understand what is happening inside of the mind of this person I interacted with somewhere around mid-2020. So after masks policies came in virtually everywhere, my wife and I traveled across country from Atlanta to Colorado in our RV to go visit a friend of mine for a couple of days. And as we traveled from state to state, like I said, I'm in a red state, and there are blue states and more democratic. Those states in particular were just crazy about masks inside of all the stores, gas stations, everywhere you went, all the silly rules that were imposed. So as I traveled, I'd stop at a gas station and I'd, turn on the pump, stick it in the RV, and I would literally just walk into the gas station just to use the restroom while I was filling up gas. And that's all I was there to do. I wasn't purchasing anything, just going in to use the restroom. In one instance, in New Mexico, which is a very blue state, these people were crazy. I walk into the gas station, and on my way toward the restroom, I hear a young lady say, "Sir, you got to have a mask. Sir, you got to have a mask." And I basically just ignored her. I walked straight to the restroom. On my way out, I hear an elder gentleman who, he was an Indian, a Native American, and I just hear this guy go, "Sir, sir." And as I'm walking, I turn and I look at him, and he says, "Don't forget to wear your mask." On my way out, he reminds me, "Don't forget to wear your mask." Now, some of these people, they wear their masks that are like falling off of their nose, and they're just, their noses are completely exposed, right? This guy's mask was so far down his face, I could see his open mouth. This is the guy telling me to wear my mask.
Yeah,
So maybe
yeah,
you could help me understand what is happening in the brains of people like that.
yeah. Well, I would have to sit down with this guy for an hour or so to see what was going on with him. But it's what you described is extremely common. I mean, I've seen it myself going on the train to Edinburgh. You know,
In fact,
people.
in fact, there recently was a viral video of a woman on an airplane who got arrested for smacking this old man around. The guy was eating, and she's screaming and cursing at him, trying to smack and punch him, yelling at him to put your fucking mask on, and she wasn't wearing a mask.
That's right. Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
happening in these people's minds?
Well, and I think Matthias Desmet talks about this. He makes some good points into how he describes it. I think he mentioned how before March 2020, people had very little. There was a lot of things wrong in society. I mean, I certainly felt in society before March 2020 there seemed to be a weird hiatus. I thought there's something not quite right going on. It was just it was like a lull before the storm. I think there was something brewing, and he talks about in terms of people's lives they were in meaningless jobs, they had no sense of direction, etc. And I would go further and say, well, you've got decades or hundreds and hundreds of years, I suppose, as well. The erosion of, I would suppose, the Christian sensibility in Western society, deliberately so by governments. They want to erode this idea of a religious sensibility, whether one's a full-blown churchgoer but the idea of this idea of the transcendent has been eroded and replaced by science and also the postmodernism. Do as thou wilt, in the terrible idea of sexual liberation was set up to liberate us, but as people like someone E. Michael Jones, the American historian, in his book Libido Dominandi, talks about this really interesting book. It's not made us any happier, sexual liberation. So we've got to this point in March 2020. The onslaught of the science, COVID, the science, and people suddenly. So these mask zealots, they've suddenly got a purpose in the world. They've joined the big team now. They're in the big league.
Yeah.
They can join this. They have a purpose. They can, I remember going to the supermarket very early on. And this is before masks were made mandatory. We were all standing outside in these 2 meters spots on the ground outside, and the wind was blowing this way towards my face, and all about 30 or 40 people in front of me, coughing and smoking and whatever, but it was all like coming towards me, and I'm like, well, if there's a bloody pandemic, I'm going to catch this virus. I'm going to catch it.
You're going to catch it right there and now.
But there was a guy, he'd been given the job of 1 in, 1 out, 1 in, 1 out.
Yeah, they tried that here briefly.
He was getting off in this. This was his moment in life. This is his 15 minutes.
Yeah.
He was the COVID guard of Sainsbury's supermarket. And he was loving it. So I think people, these mask people and people who are trying to enforce the rules, they would like this to stay like this forever. I think it gives them a sad sense of importance. It's what's known as stripitis. They have their stripes, and this is it. They can be enforcers, and you can see how in the concentration camps, the Nazis picked out the selected people who were up for that job. Who had no morals, who had no scruples about taking their fellow countrymen to a gas chamber. They would get patted on the back and good lad. you've done a good job there. And that's frightening. That there are in what's I think what's it shown with the idea, all this talk about camps and in mandatory vaccinations. People have come out the closet, and you can see what they are: fascists.
Yeah.
They're ready. They're ready. If camps were set up tomorrow, this guy was shouting at you to put your mask on. He'd sign up for a job as a camp attendant, camp warden.
Yeah.
That's the situation we're in, I think.
There was something in what Aaron said, the two examples, the one of the woman on the plane and she's not wearing a mask, and the guy with the mask here saying wear a mask. There's something for me in that about compliance, like you must comply, because I had my own experience getting refused service at a restaurant.
Yeah.
But the woman, so, I mean, it's the same psychotic situation. People sitting down, not wearing a mask. I'd been there 3 times, and Jenny's wearing a mask, and she said, "Have you got a mask?" And I say, "I'm exempt." And she said, "Do you have a lanyard or anything?"
Yeah.
And my response was, "Have you read the government guidelines? There's no requirement for me to have a lanyard." She says, "Do you know what? I think I'm going to refuse to serve you. You're far too aggressive." So Jenny's got too much fucking power, right? That's too much power for waitress Jenny. But what she was asking me was, comply, do what everybody else is doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's comply and come down to our level. Everyone's the same. No one is better than one another. And don't dare put your head above the parapet. Because the sense, I said, a lot of people, they have no, a lot of these people have never been successful in life. They've never tried it. They don't feel secure in their own selves. They want everyone to be kind of in a prison sort of environment, I think, where everyone's the same and we just have to get on with it. It placates their I think their sense of failure in life. I mean, I'll give you an example. I turned up to Edinburgh one day and I was a bit early, or I had a cancellation or something, and I thought I'll go to St Giles Cathedral on the Royal Mile. It's a very nice church in Edinburgh, and I hadn't been to anything in lockdown because everything's masks and sanitizer and stress, and I said, I'm going in, and this old man at the door and an old woman said, I said, "Are you open?" He goes, "Yes." I said, "Oh, good." And as I started to walk in, he goes, "Where's your mask?" I said, "I'm exempt." And he went, and you could see he was fuming, angry. He says, "Well, how do I know that?" I said, and I looked at him, I said, "Well, how would you not know? Or not, how would you know? How would you know? You're not me." I said, "You're not me. How would you know? Have you got anything to prove it?" I got this tiny scrap of paper out of my wallet, which said, "I am exempt." It was like something I printed off the internet. I just showed him it, and I went, "There you go." He goes, "Fine." It was like when he could see, I beat him there. I got him. I made him comply.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Just even though there was a silly, arbitrary piece of paper that you made up yourself was enough for him to be satisfied with getting you to comply. Just show me something. Just do it.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got these bloody mask refusers. I've got them.
That's
And he's actually breaking the law.
I mean, at the beginning, when I was on the train, I used to get in arguments with the train guards. I just a bit of argy, so to speak. But one time, I was on the train, I was in the carriage late at night, completely on my own. I was just reading my book, and the guard comes along, and goes, I don't know if you asked me my ticket. He said, "Where's your mask?" I said, "I'm exempt." And he said, "Have you got any evidence for that?" They don't ask now. they've changed their policy. They don't ask anything now at all. But so where's your exemption? I said, oh well, I've got an exemption card. And the same scrap of piece of paper, the same one. Right? I showed him it, and I went, oh, by the way, I've got something else to show you as well. And I took out the Equality Act 2010.
Yeah.
How it's unlawful for you to prove.
Yeah.
And he went, oh no, I don't want to see that. I said, no, you will see it. And he started walking down the corridor. So I got up off my seat and I followed him down to the doors of the train.
Well done.
I said, this, you need to see this as well. You're not allowed to ask me anything.
That's right.
And he wouldn't look at me in the face. He was so cowardly. He wouldn't turn around and look at me in the face. He was just talking to me, but with his back towards me. And I thought, you see, they know they've been had, but they know it's illogical, but yet they still want to play the game, and they'll put you in the camp at the drop of a hat.
Yeah.
You know.
Was that the card with a £9,000 fine on it?
Yeah. I don't know if I've still got it in the wallet, actually. I might have. Have I? Don't know if I have or not anymore. But, I can't find it. No, I don't know where it is. But yeah, £9,000 fine for giving you hassle, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
I
go ahead, Polly.
No, I was just going to add to that by saying I've noticed you hardly get asked now in a lot of places, and I wonder if it's because people have been attacked verbally and probably physically. You know.
When I mentioned earlier about the big box chain stores here that like Walmart and Home Depot, they first come out and they announce that masks are required in our store, and then they would very quietly publish on their websites that they wouldn't be enforced. And I suspected that that's because, see, we have similar laws here that you're not allowed to harass someone or force them to prove their medical condition or their exemption. And I suspected that the tactic that was being used, that they would first come out and publicly say, you have to wear a mask in our store, and they'd put up their signs out front, big signs, wear a mask, and then without any fanfare, they would quietly publish that they would not be enforced. I suspected that they did it that way because if they actually tried to enforce it, they would be breaking the law. Because like I said, we have similar legislation here. I think it's the 1964 Civil Rights Act in America that prevents discrimination of any kind, including medical discrimination or disabilities, things like that. So if you have a disability, if you have, for instance, an exemption to wearing a mask, that it's nobody's business to ask you to prove that. And it's illegal, so they open themselves up to some hefty lawsuits. And not only that, but they also open themselves up to, like you mentioned, people getting aggressive, physically fighting, between a patron of a store and a store clerk trying to enforce some arbitrary, unenforceable, illegal rule. So there would be other lawsuits on top of that, and people getting hurt and getting in fist fights over things like that. So I don't know. It's just it goes right back to everything that we've been saying. That on one hand, they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. This is part of the mass formation. This is part of John Gatto's reference to Alexander Ingalls that the number one purpose of schooling is an automatic response to authority. So somebody in a position of authority, a guy at the front of a store with a clipboard or an iPad counting one in, one out, that he's got some small position of authority, people will just automatically go right along without any question.
Yeah. It's the open prison that they're trying to create. Yeah. This biosecurity, biohazard society, which people like Michel Foucault, the French philosopher. I've got a lot of problems with Foucault because he was a queer theorist. He wanted to reduce the age of consent for children for having sex and all that. But he, in his books about the panopticon, the prison, where the prisoners just basically regulate themselves. They don't know if they're being watched or not. It's in seeing oneself, life, reducing life to just a pure object of biohazard. The philosopher, the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben talks about this. Interesting man. Some of his books are very interesting, and he's quite old now. He'd be regarded as a left-wing intellectual on the continent in Europe. Kind of in the sort of same zone. I think he even works together with him in a certain European university project called I can't remember what it's called, but got the guy called Slavoj Zizek.
Oh yeah.
Who had that big famous debate with Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
Well, Agamben basically he thinks what's going on is fascism. The masks, the social distancing, the not being able to mourn people, not being able to celebrate, to have weddings, not being able to socialize. He calls it this idea of the lockstep. It's incomprehensible how it's everyone's following their own message with this, and he says that we've been reduced to a biohazard, and he likens it to Nazism. He likens it to fascism, and he says that ultimately this is unsustainable. It's unsustainable. In the biosecurity, the surveillance, the track and trace, the digital currency, and of course you can see how it will morph into the climate. And of course, the Scottish Government document I mentioned right at the beginning of our chat about socialising on Zoom and not travelling by car anywhere, and they are setting us up to try to. And Hannah Arendt, I think the quote. I've got a quote here. Hannah Arendt, is it? Where is it? Where is it? Oh. Maybe. Well, Hannah Arendt talks about how what's going on now, and I think she's right, is essentially they're trying to transform human life as we know it to something completely different. I don't, and it's because it's in lockstep. I don't see how anyone can say this is not kind of sort of technocratic fascist kind of political movement. And it's interesting, very interesting. I'll read this little quote. This was a book called Russia's Political Hospitals, written way back in, when was it, the early 70s. How basically political dissidents were put into the prisons and gulags because they were challenging the status quo. And one of the prisoners was a guy called Vladimir Bukovsky. He spent some time in a psychiatric prison for his political views because he dissented. And he says this in the foreword to this book: the peculiar features of the Soviet political system, the communist ideology, the uncertainties and difficulties of the science of psychiatry, the labyrinths of the human conscience, all have weirdly woven themselves together to create a monstrous phenomenon, the use of medicine against man. And it's so prophetic because you look at they're using medicine and science now. It's become a monstrous phenomenon, this all this. You point this out to people. People on the left or people on the right. Some people say this is fascism. Some people say this is communism coming. Mm-hmm. I would summarize Hannah Arendt from The Origins of Totalitarianism. I would say it's two cheeks of the same arse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or to use in America, two cheeks of the same ass.
Yeah.
I remember many years ago I used to listen to Jordan Maxwell a lot, and during one of his interviews, I recall him saying that between fascism, socialism, and communism, he said there's not a dime's worth of difference between them.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And it's funny. Yeah, so carry on. Sorry, sorry.
Well, I was just going to recall in your speech, your talk that you gave, I forget where it was, the Scottish Family Party, I think.
Yeah,
The 20-minute talk that you gave, very, very good, by the way.
thank.
You mentioned something in there about uh, the neo-communism as its purpose or one of its goals is to uh, eliminate individualism in the form. Let me see. I've got a note somewhere here. Um, Against individualism, towards standardizing all human behavior. And I see some very, very nefarious purposes, multiple nefarious purposes behind that idea. So if you'd like to expand on that.
Yeah, yeah, that was it. The Scottish Family Party conference back in, I think it was November. Oh yeah, it was November, I think. Yeah, I've got the speech here actually, but yes, standardised. I mean, I focused on Scottish schools in that talk, and I mentioned they have mental health lessons essentially. They focus on problematizing their mind in a very in a cognitive way, essentially looking at their mind from a cognitive perspective for infants, and essentially it's based on a kind of cognitive behavioral therapy type idea. So they look at their emotions, their feelings, their fears, and make it like all very. Oh, if you feel this, if you feel depressed, that means you're suffering depression. You can go for a walk, be with a friend. But what's very sinister about it, especially in light of lots of different speakers and thinkers on this idea, is it's done in a kind of group scenario. And there's a guy called G.E. Griffin, and I might have shared
Ed,
him on my YouTube.
Was it Edward G. Griffin?
Edward G. Griffin, yeah. He
Yeah.
talks about sensitivity training, and it's very prominent in the Esalen, the counterculture movement in 1950s, 60s, Carl Rogers, and those type of people. Group therapy, essentially, where there's a very charismatic leader. It's a very self-confessional thing, very abusive, and E. Michael Jones talks about it as well. That when these groups sprung up in the 1950s and 60s in America, it made people, basically made them mentally ill, made them crazy, and so essentially the standardization that essentially they're trying in the mental health thing in the schools they're trying to inculcate these children to become mental health kind of customers, so to speak, or patients in some way. They're not wanting to, they're limiting their scope of consciousness of what is to be a human being. And
they're pathologizing normal behavior, normal emotions.
Yeah, because from a mental healthism perspective, as I talked about, they to be depressed or anxious or sad is a negative thing that should be it's like you've got these symptoms, you should get rid of them. But of course, if you read the Bible, for example, and that's a wonderful example of how different one can conceive of it. The idea of not when you're anxious, do not fear, when you're depressed, do not fear. You're kind of held in the cradle of something bigger than your own musings or your own mind. So they want to get rid of that and standardize to think of themselves as a cognitive machine. And they have so it's done in this sort of sensitivity, cult-like, a very abusive group scenario with a very unqualified person to do it, who's not qualified to deal with the kind of psychic phenomena that's coming out of all these little kids, talking about their parents' depressions and talking about their own mental, their own manifestations of their mind. It's inappropriate because they're not asking the parents for consent, and the parents don't even know their children are being given this treatment in the school, and then at the same time they have all these like basically communistic lessons and values of the greater good and climate and critical race theory. So if you're white and you're a young little boy and I'll give you a story. One person I know, his child's at school, 14 or 15 years old. He's standing for the school council. And in the school council, the candidates, about 20 of them, majority are identifying as LGBT. And he's one of the only heterosexual candidates. And he was called a bigot by one of the candidates who identified as LGBT because he was a white male and he was heterosexual, and he was called a bigot because of that. And so this guilt complex that they're inculcating in children, and the sex education, it's all they're asking children in schools in Scotland, asking them questions about do you partake in anal sex. And a lot of the lessons are all about, rimming. If you know what rimming is.
Yeah, unfortunately,
I'm
aware.
So they're wanting to inculcate this mental healthism, this postmodernism. They want to create this standardized vision of their future, where any sense of religious sensibilities or in families, traditional families, sovereignty of oneself. You need medicine, you need them experts to help you through these things. It is a frightening dystopian vision they have.
They're going where they have no business at all, right?
No business. I mean, they're teaching 7-year-olds in school in Scotland, introducing the idea of transgenderism. Why? My question is, why would you introduce it? Now, I've worked with transgender people. It's not something that you would aspire to encounter in one's existence, as in your own experience. You don't want to wake up one day and think, I'm in the wrong body. That's quite you've got to feel sorry for people who get to that point in their life where they feel that. And, ultimately it's their decision what they want to do with their life. But I think most people, including transgender people, I was just watching a video today of an ex-racing cyclist called Robert Miller. He's now called Philippa York. He transitioned after he stopped racing, and he was like king of the mountains in the Tour de France. He's still very upset about the whole idea of, it's been a traumatic journey for him. It's been no romance. It was very difficult for him to come to that decision to do it. And whether he's over it or not, I don't know. He still looks very vulnerable to me. But to introduce it into school to a 7-year-old, what are they? They're bringing in adult sexual ideas because it's bound up with sexuality. Bound up with how one views oneself sexually. And so to introduce this idea to children and sort of just bring it out the bag. Oh, look, you could be a girl. You could be neither. You could be a two-spirit or whatever number of different genders there are. I think that is, I don't think. Well, let's not beat around the bush. It's abuse.
Yeah.
It's grooming, in a sense.
It's grooming.
Yeah, it's grooming.
The mere fact that you would ask a child at the age of 7, and I've even heard in some cases 5 and 6 year-old children are being exposed to these things. The very fact that you would ask a child, do you engage in rimming, would be absolutely nothing more than introducing it, because a 5, 6, 7-year-old child would have no idea what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah, and children are very curious, and children, when they're not sexually or emotionally developed or cognitively developed enough to understand sex and the implications of sex or sexual relationship, there may be a sense of curiosity. There may be a sense of even kind of arousal to a certain extent, but then there's the guilt with that but the reason we keep sexual material away from children is to stop them getting into that place of confusion. That's why you shield pornography from children.
Yeah.
I'm not judging anyone who watches pornography per se. An adult's an adult. It's up to them if they want to deal with that and the consequences of that. But a child, well, they're not able to comprehend what is going on in an adult way, and therefore, it has to be. You have to really. I mean, I'll give you a terrible example, and I think it's more nefarious than we think. What's going on? I think it is abuse. In a recent Scottish Government document, it was the transgender guidance for schools for teachers, and how they should deal with transgenderism. And one of the main document was all about, if a child decides they're transitioning, we don't have to tell the parents. We can give them a female name, and if they're a boy, give them a female name, but we won't tell the parents because the parents might be upset. So when they come to school, they can put a bow in their hair, and we can call them Cecilia. And then when they go home, they can be David again. Right, so there was all that. But then at the bottom of the document, there was for resources for teachers. One of the books was called Beyond Magenta. And in this book, it depicts a 6-year-old boy giving oral sex to old men. And I found this, I read this document when it was first published. And I wrote to my Member of Parliament to find out. And the Education Secretary wrote back to my Member of Parliament. And she says, oh, it was just a typo. It was just a typo.
What?
A typographical error. And I'm like, how the hell can you insert a book with paedophilic material in a Scottish Government document and then just say it's a typo?
Wow, that's... if that's pure evil right there. They know exactly what they're doing. It's almost like at a typical political press conference when they get asked a really hard question and then they respond in a non-response way, in a way that doesn't even address the question, but the mere fact that they just simply gave a response is somehow good enough, and they're never really held to account.
The thing is, I was one of the only people to notice it. Richard Lucas of the Scottish Family Party noticed it as well, actually. And I made a video about it, I think, and I wrote an article about it in my website. And I noticed it when I noticed it. I tweeted it out. I think I tweeted about, well, why is this book in here? And then I went to the website, to the document, to download it again because I wanted to show someone, and it was taken out.
Yeah, that's right.
See, someone in the Scottish Government had noticed, or had been alerted to the fact that people like me had noticed it was taken out. Guess what? It was put back in later on.
Wow.
Seriously?
It was taken back out. Then it was put back in, and then it was taken back out. 3 or 4 times it happened. And I looked at that and I thought, someone in the Scottish government is taunting people. They're taunting us, saying, look what we can do. We can put in, out, shake it all about.
So that's like a repeated typo.
Yeah, well, why would it be put in and out the same document several times in a space of a week or so? That was just taunting people. Look what we can get away with. We can put paedophilic material into a school guidance document, and no one can touch us.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
is that something about the state taking over the parental role? All of that.
Well,
it's a flaunting of their power, that they're literally untouchable. And it's like I was saying in a similar fashion at a political press conference, when our press secretary here in America, Jen Psaki, is asked a particularly hard question. And this is a tactic that's not unique to her. This has always been going on. When they get asked a hard question, they respond in a way that doesn't address the question at all. And yet, somehow in these people's minds, the mere fact that they responded is sufficient.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like they just come up with anything and that'll make them happy. That'll be enough. It's incredible. It's incredible. I'm just dumbfounded by it. It's not the first time this has happened. Nicola Sturgeon calls herself Chief Mammy.
That's horrible.
And makes out that she's some sort of caring figure that's so wonderful for children. She often gets pictured with children, and yet this document, and then of course there's other things that have happened. There is the big scandal about one of the members of Parliament, Nicola Sturgeon's fellow MP, Mary Black, her name is. She took a drag queen, a very adult performer, to a year 1 class, which is primary 1 in Scotland, year 1, to do story time. Pardon?
Age 4 and 5.
4 and 5 years old, and so she took this drag queen who's got her website was extremely pornographic. I mean, she's an adult drag queen. I mean, I've seen drag queens in my life. I mean, if you're an adult, fair enough. But to take it to a primary 1 school, and the parents weren't informed, and so people found out, of course, and the Scottish government had to apologise. And
the name of the drag queen was Flo Job.
Flo Job, that's right, Flo Job. And what happened was a guy called Darma Garvey. He's a rapper in Scotland. I don't know how you can have a Scottish rapper. Strange, genre to have in Scotland. But Scottish rapper, and he writes articles for the Daily Record, this newspaper. And he basically said that parents who were outraged at this event, the drag queen Mary Black, they were basically homophobic. Yeah,
she did too. She said that.
Yeah, she said it as well. That Mary Black, of course, Mary Black's a lesbian. Mary Black's partner's related to Darma Garvey, the Scottish rapper, but they never mentioned that in the article. I mean, it's not important. Well, it is important, but I don't really care. I don't think parents were homophobic for being worried about this happening. And so I wrote an article about that and said, this normalisation of this and of this kind of queer theory in schools, it is couched in the paedophilic kind of movement that used to be called the paedophile information exchange in the UK. I don't know if it's still going, but you know, a kind of group campaigning for, I don't know, recognition for being attracted to children. I don't know what their thing was, but you know, it's extremely dubious. And then there was another thing. There was another thing. A school near here where I live, they had a video on their LGBT website, LGBT club, and it was called Polari. Polari is code language that gays used to use, gay men, in the time in the UK when being homosexual was illegal. So gay men used to communicate with this strange kind of invented language. But this video, it was extremely pornographic, talking about anal sex, oral sex, semen, over, and it was some people complained about it. It was taken off the website straight away, but there's been no investigations as to how the hell did this get on the website in the first place? Who approved it?
Mm-hmm. Or accountability.
There's a lot of that lack of accountability going around. It's been, again, that's not at all anything new.
Yeah.
So just I have to remind you of why the shift in the narrative and solutions, because we've got about 20 minutes.
Wider shift? Yes. Well, there does seem to be a wider shift, isn't there?
Why do you think they're shifting the narrative now? They're not doing it everywhere right enough, because, you know, we know that.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, there's discussions about lockdown was wrong, really. It's harmful, and you know, we have to get rid of restrictions soon. Most, not in Scotland, I noticed that they're hanging on to COVID-19 with the skin of their, you know, they really want to keep it. They'll be the last ones to go. To be honest, why? Well, I think, you know, if this was a planned, orchestrated attack, global, lockstep, you know, Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, I think they've realised that the world's too big, actually, because we live in the information age, and it works for them, but it also works against them. With the amount of data that's coming out of vaccine adverse reactions and the deaths, and you know, we can see it in the television, footballers and sports people collapsing,
and the lack of efficacy with the vaccines as well.
Yeah, in the blatant fascism, totalitarianism in different countries. And you know, and also this the general data. You know, if you look at Scotland, 80% vaccinated in the country, 20% not, or something like that, and the hospital rates for the vaccinated and the vaccinated, there's no difference. The vaccine's not doing anything. At the very least, it's not stopping people who are vaccinated going to hospital. It's not stopping transmission. You know, people were sold one vaccine or two vaccines at the most, and then it'd be freedom, and then it's a booster. So the deluge of the weight of all that, I think, you know, that they can only go more totalitarian, and well, I think they might find it hard to do that. So I think that's one big reason why the narrative is changing. It could be the calm before the storm. You know, could it get much worse? Could something else happen? You know.
Is there something about owning the narrative that they have to own it? Because the things that are being said over the last week, for example, are things that people like you and I have been saying for 22 months and getting called crazy and insane. You know, like the Kay Adams interview when that woman came on and said, this has all been blown out of proportion. She was even allowed to say the statistics, 0.014% chance of dying, average age 82 years old, all the things that we've been saying and getting called crazy for. Are they taking it back? Are the mainstream media trying to own that now in the government?
Yeah, well, I mean, because it was just a few weeks before I was cut off on BBC Radio
That's right.
Scotland for saying pretty much exactly the same thing about the statistics, and I was cut off, and I was talking about the PSYOP and how it was deliberately planned, and I was cut off, and now after that, Laura Dodsworth on the mainstream news channels, and yeah, I think at the end of the day, they'll never admit. I don't think they'll ever admit they did it wrong, or it was a mistake.
They didn't do it wrong. They didn't do it wrong. They did exactly what they intended to do.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't it the Danish government or the Danish health ministry or something like that just very recently came out and said, no, it was I think it was the media, where they came out and said, we're sorry that we overinflated the numbers, we got this wrong, we got that wrong, and they sort of came out and apologized for their role.
That's right. Yeah.
That was quite incredible. I mean, can you imagine the BBC coming out and saying that? I mean, there's been some articles quite critical of the whole thing in the BBC, even, just flying around. And you got to think, well, it's very difficult to know what the machinations of what's going on. There's the whole thing about all the parties going on. Boris Johnson in the government have had parties. Other people in the different departments have parties during lockdown when we couldn't even go to visit our parents in hospital if they were ill. And Sturgeon, Nicola, out saying, "Oh yes, Boris Johnson should resign." Well, she's broken the rules as well.
Yes.
It's like they're all trying to score political points and come out like holier than thou, and like, well, he or she, without saying, cast the first stone. I mean, they're not shy of casting the first stone. It's sickening the way they do it.
Do you believe that though? Do you think they really did? I mean, I think they did exactly what they wanted, but it's got such a false air to me. The pictures of Boris dancing, the pictures of Keir Starmer, it seems very orchestrated. Why would someone sit on that for nearly 2 years?
Yes, I think, nothing appears in the mainstream media is by accident. So
no,
you got to think. Well, I'm quite skeptical. So why is it out? What's in the air? Is this the calm before the storm? Is this a cooling off period? Is this the transition into the climate hysteria?
One idea.
I wonder if it's a way of relieving the tension that they've created, because when people get angry, for instance, at Boris Johnson, it's a way for them to relieve the pressure and tension that's been building up in their own minds over the last 2 years. And then, like you said, a calm before the storm, after people have a chance to vent and be angry and scream at Boris and call for resignation, and then they unleash a new variant or something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you go by the ideas of this guy, Juice Merleau, in The Rape of the Mind, and he talks about menticide, the brainwashing, and the waves of hope and fear. I mean, is this just another?
I'm thinking
a lull. We've been in a state of fear and anxiety, and Christmas was ruined, and the New Year was ruined. Now, look at this! We've got Boris Johnson. He's been breaking the rules. A bit of hope, a bit of something's going to change. Well, we could have another variant come along to depress us all again, and this will break a lot of people. I think it's been bad enough. It's almost 2 years now. People are at breaking point. People have broke. So it's just, is it just another continuous process? When you see people like Bill Gates talking about the future, he's like smirking openly. Yeah,
the duper's delight.
Taunting us, going, there'll be no return to normal until basically the world's vaccinated, and the worst pandemic will be worse. The next one will be worse.
Yeah.
laughing.
and giggling, smiling, smirking. That's yeah. And most people are pretty familiar with duping delight, and it's all over Bill's face. He's terrible at hiding it.
Yeah, he is
He revels in the lies and the spin that he's putting out.
Mhm.
he's an arch psychopath. I mean, he's got no respect for human life.
Yeah.
You can't do this to the human world. Restrict people the way and threat because he's threatening people with this technological injection, the mRNA injection, uh, and he's like he thinks nothing of it. I mean, I worked in forensic psychiatric high security hospitals, and I met saner people than him. I think, yeah, I really did.
I have no doubt
He
about that.
he he is. I once met a guy who murdered a child, and it was chilling to hear the story of how he murdered the child, and in the way he talked about, just in the way Bill Gates talks about injecting his children right in the arm.
Yeah, we just shoot it right into their veins, he says.
It's at the same level. I'm sorry, it's at the same level. These people are functioning psychopaths in the world, very successful, very rich. They're dangerous, and unfortunately, they're very dangerous.
Mhm.
Uh,
You know,
yeah,
That collective anger is not going to go away. Like but people having been denied holding the hand of their wife, their son, their daughter, their mother as they were dying, and then we have this display put on. That anger is not going to go away, is it? It's got to come out somehow.
yeah, you got to wonder. We can't go back to normal, the new normal sort of idea. How can we trust journalism now? How can we trust the politicians now?
Yeah.
Where most of them have been utterly useless. The journalists have been useless, mainstream, and the politicians, even even the ones that are not particularly, people like Steve Baker. Aaron might not know him, but Steve Baker in the UK kind of has been against a lot of the restrictions, but he's not. He's still quite sedate. Even the ones that are anti are quite
Yeah.
sedate.
Very. Yeah.
They don't look at the government documents about human augmentation, overriding ethics, overriding informed consent to give people mRNA nanotech technology induced into their brain for the future, and written by in the UK government, and all the restrictions about the law has been put into place to take away people from their homes and their children away from them in case of infectious disease and all this sort of why is Steve Baker and the other guy with the white hair, Desmond Swain,
Mm-hmm.
why are they not speaking about that? And they're meant to be anti,
Exactly.
and even the Laura Dodsworths, they
Yeah.
don't mention these very nefarious and sinister policy documents
Yeah.
that are out there freely available, and it's like, oh, let's have a nice little kumbaya about psychological tactics that the UK government uses for the future.
Yeah.
It's very odd.
Yeah.
I think, like I was saying, that it's a way of relieving the pressure valve. When we ask why now that they released the Boris Johnson party, that info of the video, uh, I think it's a way of just temporarily releasing some of the anger pressure, like just a temporary release valve. Let some of it out, and as Bruce alluded to, that it might, very well be a lull in the waves um, that he described earlier by that other author, Jude. I can't.
What Dodsworth?
Uh,
Just.
Ju-
Just.
Oh, Just Marlou,
Just
yeah.
so but at the same time, I suspect it could also work against them because it doesn't take a lot of brain power to figure out that. And we've had so many examples of all the authority figures breaking their own rules. It's not just about rules for thee and not for me, but it's about if we're talking about a supposed deadly pandemic. like Ferguson and all these health ministers and all these people that are running around cheating on their wives and going places and interacting with people that they shouldn't be because well they're telling you not to. It doesn't take a lot of brain power for the average person to see that if there really was a deadly pandemic, these health authorities should know better than anyone how deadly it is, and yet they're not acting as though it's deadly. So
Exactly.
it goes to show that they don't believe their own narrative. Not
Yeah,
not just the fact that they think that they're above us or better than us, rules for thee and not for me, but it goes to show in the case of a deadly pandemic that if they were really, you know, serious and they were concerned about a deadly virus, then they simply would not be breaking their own rules.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I used to have a great interest in forensic psychology, and worked in forensic hospitals, and I used to read a lot about serial killers and psychopaths. And one of the big things about psychopaths is they get more bolshy and confident as they go on, and they like to leave calling card. They like to taunt, and so a lot of this, I think a lot of it is you know their own hubris getting in the way of the narrative, because they want to be able to goad us in a sense. But I think, in a positive note, maybe this change in narrative, uh, they realize, how can they police this?
Mhm.
How can they police it? How can they police people to wear a mask for any more longer? How can they police people to stay at home and work? How I think it's the enormity of their project, and psychopaths get ideas above the reality of the situation. How can they really police this? How can they control it? I think they'll have computer modelers to do. They they'll know it's got to be an incredible task to control society at the level they want to control that. And maybe they're realizing now that actually it's far too big. It's far too ambitious at this point. Maybe in 20 years' time, when all these kids in the school have been reframed through the mental healthism classes and the LGBT classes and all that, maybe 20 years' time it might be more easy for them, because all the people who are thinking about it at the moment, conscious or adults, that maybe they'll be dead, at some point. Uh, and so, 20, 30 years time, it might be much, much easier to implement the AI revolution, transhumanism kind of thing. It might be much easier.
Maybe they've given out enough state injectables.
Referring to the school children, on the other hand, have you heard recently? It was mentioned that in a couple of, I think this was in the UK, a couple of school districts, six, I believe, where there were either middle school or high school kids who, en masse, just decided
Mhm.
we're not wearing masks anymore and we're not doing your testing. Something like out of 1,300 kids, only 67 kids complied.
Yeah,
And
Yeah,
that's
somebody was
not.
on BBC radio complaining about that.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I
So
think people.
there's a little bit of positive notes happening here and there. I'm starting to see a couple of articles where, um, God, I forget them specifically off the top of my head, but a couple of large industries, just very, very recently, I think in Canada, the truckers in the trucking industry, they backpedaled and they removed or stopped mandating that truckers be vaccinated. So
Mhm,
that one was taken back. I think something about the airlines, particularly the pilots,
mhm,
that they don't want vaccinated pilots flying, which is a tacit admission to the myocarditis, pericarditis, heart issues, clotting issues. Um, uh, so there are other examples of some of the pushback that perhaps people like us and all the people at these giant rallies and protests and online, millions and millions of emails to your parliament members and your congressmen. So many people, like you said, that the internet, information, so much free flow of information. So many people are aware, far more than we're being told.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
in the UK, they're threatening to mandatory vaccinations for any National Health Service staff in England. 100,000 could lose their jobs if they don't get vaccinated, and supposedly the NHS is at a breaking point. I mean, and the government are wanting to save the NHS. Supposedly, I don't think they want to save it. I think they want to destroy it. But at the same time, if they do get sacked, all these people who refuse to get vaccinated, then you've got 100,000 whistleblowers out there.
yeah,
You've got
yeah. There's
you've
that
got
too.
100,000 whistleblowers who are willing to they've got nothing to lose then.
Right.
The government will know that they've got nothing to lose because they'll have so much dirt on what's went on. It could just implode. I think it could implode.
They were already talking. So I was following the Together campaign this morning, and I was quite amazed at radiographers, GPs, nurses. It's just like, oh my God, it's getting more and more, which might be part of the backpedaling that's going on. But
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think Bruce is correct when he says that they don't want to save the NHS. They want to
no,
destroy it. And I think that also bleeds into other areas, like particularly government's trust in authorities, public trust in health industry, the public trust in government overall.
mm-hmm.
And I think this is leading into a narrative worldwide. This is all happening for one purpose, and that is globalism and a one world government. Because how else is the entire world gonna get out of this horrible mess? All of our governments are corrupt, they're incompetent, we don't have any trust in anything they say, anything they do. All of our major institutions that we rely on, like healthcare, we don't trust the doctors anymore, we don't trust the scientists anymore, we don't trust the government anymore, we certainly don't trust the media. So how do we fix this? The only way, it's the Hegelian dialect. How do we fix it?
Exactly.
They create the problem. They destroy the trust in the national institutions and government, and the only way to fix it is to a big brother, all powerful world government.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly that. That's what was talked about at my stand in the park this morning. This is what they're doing in order to. I mean, I don't
How
know
many
if you
did you
saw.
have, by the way?
I think we're up to 38 now.
Brilliant.
So I don't know if you saw this the other day. They had Biden, the puppet,
Mm-hmm.
quote Stalin. He quoted Joseph Stalin.
What, as in a favourable way?
No,
No?
in a subversive way. Like he was actually pretty much admitting that they stole the election, because what he said was, it wasn't verbatim Stalin, and he didn't attribute it to Stalin, but someone's made him say it. And it was about, it's not important who votes, it's important who counts the vote. And that's a take on one of Stalin's famous quotes. And he said, Biden said, what we're trying to do here is subversive. So he's actually admitting they're trying to change the way government works. So it is happening all over the world. So people are looking at him going, that's utterly corrupt,
Yeah.
So yeah, that was spoken about at our stand in the park, like saying if they break down everything, they can put in the solution. But I guess what we have to do is put in our own solution, right? Our solution.
Well,
Parallel society.
you look at the terrible Scottish Parliament, and you've got Nicola Sturgeon,
Yeah.
and then you've got all the opposition. They're not opposition. They sit there and do nothing really. But of course they kind of criticise her, and oh, they have a solution. We can sort this COVID situation out. We can come in and save the day. It's just good. It's just throwing good money after, bad money after bad money, and it's pitiful, isn't it? It's pitiful.
It's the same everywhere, though, as well. That's in lockstep too. That there isn't any opposition at all.
Yeah.
Really. I don't know. Actually, Aaron, your country might have the most opposition in the form of DeSantis, for example, or the Florida and Texas. But is that real? I don't know.
Well, it appears to be real. I'm not too sure about. I think it's Greg Abbott in Texas, but Ron DeSantis appears to be pretty real. I also suspect that Ron DeSantis is probably going to make a presidential run in 2024. As it stands, and there's also rumors that Donald Trump is going to try to run again. Because right now it doesn't look like the Republicans have anyone decent to put forward except for Ron DeSantis and possibly Greg Abbott.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't know how real it is. I will tell you that DeSantis is not mandating, as far as I can tell, he's not mandating like anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He also has an allegiance with Israel, though. That bothers me about him, but
yeah, there's that.
I mean, but I think we understand that the presidency is not at all like we thought it was. I mean, I think you get elected and then you get taken into a room,
Yeah, and then they show you the footage of the Zapruder, the Kennedy assassination that nobody's ever seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they say, this be you.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is, they don't even have to do that because everybody knows that whoever did it, whether it be the CIA or the Mossad or all of them together, everybody knows that whoever is running this planet, whoever is in charge of the government, the presidency, everybody knows that they actually killed the sitting U.S. president in broad daylight and got away with it. Everybody knows that, so they don't really have to, show them any special footage. It's an unspoken truth.
Yeah, in an occult setting as well. That had meaning. That plaza, the shape of it.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's interesting that you brought that up. It's an observation I made many years ago when I was having interviews with Jim Fetzer, who's done a lot of research and written books on the JFK assassination.
Yeah.
And I looked at Dealey Plaza from an aerial view, and there's one main road that goes straight, and then there's two roads that come in perfectly symmetrically. And as a child, I grew up playing the video game known as Atari. You guys remember that?
Yeah.
The symbol for Atari, the A, was a straight line and two hooked lines, and it was identical to the street layout in Dealey Plaza. So that's absolutely an occult symbol.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is. Well, yeah. Well, that's another conversation. This occultist themes that are going through everything. The postmodern thing, that the LGBT, transhumanism. But that's the kind of, that is occultist in a sense. It's a cultist. No, not in a sense. In all sense, it's an occult drive to destroy humanity. I mean, one of my books that I've got here,
as well as mask wearing, that's an occult ritual. Is it not?
Most definitely, yeah, most definitely. I've got a book here. It's called The Socialist Phenomenon by Shavarevich, and he was a kind of mathematician, I think, and he worked with Solzhenitsyn in a few books as well. And he talks about what's going on in communism, in the totalitarianism, and he says this is just basically, you got to look at it goes far deeper than just an economic idea of communism or something. This is utterly, it's dark. It's occultism. The aim is to destroy humanity, as Hannah Arendt talks about the transformation of human life. And the end goal of that is merging people with machines and technology, I'll tell you a weird story. Many years ago, I met a woman. You know, I've been around a lot of psychiatric hospitals and places like that, and I met a woman who told me that she had been injected, but with nanotechnology. This is like 20 years, 15, 20 years ago. Nanotechnology, and it was controlling her brain, her thoughts, muscle mass, uh, keeping her awake at night. And she'd been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. But she swore blind to me that this was done deliberately to her. And she always know about nanotechnology, this and nanobots.
Wow.
And then you read a document like human augmentation by the UK government, and you think, have they been experimenting on people with this before this?
Almost certainly, yes.
So I've totally changed my mind. You know, that I think this person that I met was probably, maybe she was talking sense.
Well,
did you think she was crazy at the time?
Yeah, how much stock did you put into her testimony back then, 20 years ago?
Well, I never knew much about nanotechnology, so it sounded fantastical. But as I was saying, now reading what I know now about nanotechnology, the way they talk about it now is exactly the way she talked about it then. The possibilities. How would she have known that?
Wow.
You know, how would she have known this? It was like she was reading from the human augmentation booklet by the UK government.
Wow. Yeah.
You know.
So, how much? We're at our 2-hour mark, and if you've got a few more minutes to spend with us, I've got one or two more questions, and then I'd like to explore what your thoughts are as far as solutions go, if you can spare the time.
Is it possible to nip to the toilet just
Sure.
for a couple of seconds?
Certainly. In fact, I'll go ahead and take my own break as well, and we can all come back in a minute. Thanks.
Right.
Okay.
That's better.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi.
All right. So, how much more time can you spare us this evening?
A few minutes. I don't know how long, but I mean, no.
Why don't
15
you,
minutes.
why don't you go ahead and before I forget, if anybody wants to get more information on you, go ahead and name your website, your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Where can people find you if you're on Twitter or whatever?
Yeah. I've got a YouTube channel. It's called Scott's Views, and that's on YouTube, and it's also on BitChute. I've got a website called Borderline, and the web address for it is Dr. Bruce Scott. I think that's pretty. They'll be able to find it if you Google it, anyways.
Yeah, it comes
And
up.
I've got articles on there, and I've written articles on a website called UK Column, but I've written a lot of my PSYOP articles on there as well, UK Column, and also on the Off Guardian. There's an article in there called "The Cult of the Brave New Normal." That's basically where you can find me. Is there anywhere else? I'm on Twitter at Dr. Bruce Scott, and Twitter is the hell ground of the revolution.
Yeah.
And I hate it, but it's a necessary evil.
I usually find out things first through Twitter.
Yeah.
Well, as bad as it is, it's still somewhat useful, obviously. So, I mean, it's a pretty decent place in many cases to share information, at least until you get banned.
Yeah.
They don't have to ban Bruce and I because we just get shadow banned. I mean, that's. Hey, we're in an echo chamber.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't get the signal boost. You don't get the promotion.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So on the front of solutions, a big question that I have, which is probably perfect for your expertise to speak on, and this question comes from I forget where I heard it or who said it. I used to spend a lot of time in listening to theological debates, and I remember, I might have been Matt Dillahunty who said this, that you cannot reason someone out of something that they were not reasoned into.
Mm-hmm.
Good quote, yeah.
Yes.
So, when it comes to, I'll just say people on our side of the fence, how do we communicate best? How best do we communicate with people on the other side of the fence when they are suffering from Pavlovian syndrome, cognitive dissonance, possibly even the power trip of, the guy with the tablet, one in, one out, counting people in the store, or waitress Jenny. How do we communicate best with these people that seem to be just a brick wall, like the guy you mentioned on that you followed him and had to show him the legislation, the Quality Act. How best? What do you think? How do we communicate best with these people?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. I think, yeah, there's an awful lot of reasoning going on in this debate. I mean, even the people on our side, so to speak, you get groups of scientists who reason very reasonably with the governments and put forward figures like, oh, well, this virus isn't as deadly as you're saying, and maybe we should. It's all very reasonable, but at the end of the day, you're reasoning with psychotic psychopaths, and clinically speaking, when you work with people who are regarded as psychopathic or psychotic, for example, you never reason with them. You don't try to reason them out of their state of mind. You never say. They say, oh, I can hear voices telling me that there's green men on the moon, and you don't say, oh, of course there's no green men on the moon. Don't be bloody silly, and look at the rationality of the situation. You can't, because you get drawn into the narrative. So even these very good scientists on our side, they're putting an awful lot of energy into reasoning about a respiratory illness. There's nothing going on, but there's actually nothing going on in society. But they're making a lot of hay, and they're creating the hay with the government about this situation. And so in one sense, it's self-defeating, I think, because they're wasting an awful lot of their life and energy on this. I mean, I can see a point for doing it, but at the same time, it is a waste of life. And it's the same. So we have to kind of keep our humanity and our sovereignty of who we are as human beings. And in one way, I think one way to do it, if you're with a patient, of course, these people are in distress. These people are troubled. But all you do, even if it's like family members or friends who are bought into the being triple jabbed or whatever, don't reason them out of you. You just be who you are. You you live your life, and then of course they'll witness that. They witness you're not frightened. You're not frightened of dying. You're not frightened of the government. You're not frightened of lots of things that everyone else is frightened of, and they can see maybe something in that. And over time, I think something clicks. When you're with a patient who's psychotic, so to speak, and they sit with you for weeks and weeks and months and months, and people for years even, to be with you in that ordinary state, it relinquishes the sort of chains of the psychosis they've been imprisoned by. Something releases, and it's not even something you can put into reason. You can't put your finger on what exactly happened, but you brought them back into the game of life, the play of life. So often people in the world are not in the game of life, so to speak. They're not playing in the world. So this obsession with science, obsession with test, track and trace. I'm a biohazard. I need vaxxed. They've been taken out of the play of life. They're seeing themselves as some sort of scientific, an object based on this scientism. So they're not in life. It's a psychotic way of existing. The only way is for people to stand firm in their own sense and on people on our side, so to speak, not to condemn them even. It's just to say, well, okay, that's the way you want to live. I'm going to live the way I live. And, eventually I think people will say, well, first, not everyone can be saved, of course. This is, maybe this is the God's plan, so to speak. The great reckoning that a lot of people will not be able to be saved. They'll be lost. We'll have lost them, and that's the way it might have to be. And but that's just one idea I have about it.
What did you say about a parallel society? Is that pretty much what we're doing with the Stand in the Park, for example, and the?
Yeah, well, I think, in many respects, I think this whole couple of years, the hiatus before, as I mentioned, the hiatus, like a real lull in existence. I felt there was nothing really going on. It was strange. I think, in a sense, with it's not all negative in a sense. I think it might have woken a lot of people up to the values that they want to embrace in the world, the lifestyle they want to lead, and how they want to interact with the world and people, and so it's created the conditions for a lot of people to live a life better than before. In a lot of people, of course, have turned. There's sort of spiritual life has been reignited. I think in many people are waking up to what is really important in life, family, having a meaning in life, a meaningful direction, and so I think this parallel, as you can see in Scotland, it's growing, the movement in Scotland. More and more people are coming to these things, whereas in the early days there was hardly anyone at these gatherings. Now it's Nicola Sturgeon must be looking at that and going, they're losing control of the psychic energy of what's going on. People are becoming more autonomous. People are becoming enlivened. They've got passion, and I think that passion can be used positively, and people are getting together. Therapists for Medical Freedom is a group that I'm involved with. There's lots of other groups, Stand in the Parks. People are connecting, and I've met wonderful people in these last couple of years, which I've never have met, and talked to people, and people have got in touch with me, and the conversations I've had, which I would never have had before March 2020. True. And so that the governments haven't been able to stop that, and that'll infuriate them because
Yeah.
they wanted to destroy humanity. They wanted to destroy all these social bonds. What's happened is they've created something bigger,
Yes.
stronger,
Too.
and paradoxically,
Mm.
and they hate that. I think they hate it.
Should we expect a doubling down of the of like what I think is like you were talking about psychopaths earlier. They don't stop, right? They don't suddenly stop, and they're not going to stop. So are we going to witness madness? I mean, we have, but
Well, yeah, they don't stop, and I think, well, they can be quite brave, but at the same time, they're quite cowardly.
right,
You look at Jonathan Van Tam,
yeah,
Sir Jonathan Van Tam. That he's a deputy chief science officer of the UK government. He said back in my first article I wrote, "The Cult of the Brave New Normal," North Guardian, way back in the early 2020. Uh, I quoted him, and he was basically saying, if he made some analogy about getting on the train to get your injection, then we get our freedoms on a train. Very, very sinister language. Getting on the train to get your freedom.
yes,
At the railway line, and of course he's just resigned.
hmm
Because that statement's got to come back to haunt him. Because no one's got their freedoms back, really. So he lied, but he's got his knighthood. But we have to stand firm because it is a war essentially. I think these psychopaths, you can never lower your guard.
Yeah.
You have to be you have to be very careful with psychopaths because you can never trust them, and you should never take their word, because their word, they speak with a forked tongue. And so, they'll have a very hard time. A lot of, I think in the next few elections in different countries in the next few years, Macron's hated, Boris is now hated,
Andrews
done, and
Scott Morrison, yeah.
They're all hated now. So you've got to get a lot of people promising things and a lot of people fresh meat, so to speak, fresh politicians coming in. So it'll be very interesting because people will be demanding, very demanding of them. Everyone will have their eye on what they're going to do. So I would, if you're a decent politician, it's a good time to be a politician. If you're a good one, but if you're a bad one and you've got to try and hang on to your power, people have got to have your guts for garters if you continue this. Yeah.
So I have one more question that I think your expertise could lend some insight. A phenomenon that I had noticed in myself, and then not long ago, just pretty recently, I've noticed other people that I follow begin to mention and notice this themselves, and that is this missing time. Because the narrative, the mainstream media and government narrative worldwide has been one single focus. It's almost like when Michael Jackson died, the media couldn't talk about anything for 2 straight weeks. When Anna Nicole Smith died, that's all you saw on TV for 2-3 solid weeks. That's all there was. It's the same situation, except this is now 2 years into it. And the media has almost nothing to talk about. It's all day, every day, just straight, constant COVID news all the time. And when I am in conversation with someone, in my mind, I'm often reminded that, when I just have a casual conversation, not talking about COVID, and then I say, this thing that we did, back then, I have to remind myself, oh, that wasn't last year. That was actually 2 years ago. Because like the last 2 years have been only one thing to think about and talk about, and it's like it's been 2 freaking years now, and now I'm having to remind myself, oh yeah, that vacation we took, that wasn't a year and a half ago, that was 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, and other people are noticing something like this concept of missing time. So,
Yeah.
from a psychological or a psychoanalytical perspective, what can you say to that?
Oh well, where does one start with that? I can empathise because I feel exactly the same.
So do
Uh,
I.
waking up every morning. Oh, I remember a while ago thinking this. Waking up every morning, thinking, "Oh, waking up into COVID land." You
Groundhog
know,
Day.
Groundhog Day every day, and I don't want to get all kind of mystical, or well, maybe I do. Maybe I do want to get mystical, but uh, I think the psyop is designed for us to get into this state where there every day is Groundhog Day. It's a monochrome world that there's just nothing different. We're constantly thinking about it. We're constantly on social media talking about it, and that is a way to if you read a book like there's a great Welsh preacher, he's dead now, but his name is Dr. Martin Lloyd Jones. He wrote a book called, I'll get it a very good book called the Christian Warfare, and he talks about how we're basically, he quotes Ephesians 6, chapter 6, verses 10 to 13, and how we're basically fighting against uh, principalities and
Yeah, not flesh and blood. Yeah.
you know, and so with our focus on COVID and COVID and COVID all day long, every day, and he talks about in his other book called Spiritual Depression, our obsession with what's going on, our anxiety, our being drawn into the fear. He would say, Dr. Martin Lloyd Jones, he would say that is one way to kind of take us, get us seduced by Satan, get us taking away from, our spirituality. And I think it's very important and it's a very powerful thing. It's a very powerful energy man, so to speak. That's kind of it's a very powerful thing to engage in the ordinary, the extraordinariness of the world, in the glorious things that are in the world. Taking a walk, playing with one's child, watching a movie, having a meal. Uh, and it's quite amazing when you stop thinking about the COVID thing, when you stop getting embroiled in it, it does feel, I think, that it's not as bad as you're getting, as you're thinking. Uh, it, it's not as so it's not as a serious thing. Life becomes a little bit brighter, and you got to wonder what that does. Because the politicians don't want us to feel like that. And I think if you can let that kind of light in, I think it has a tremendous difference in how things go. If people start having faith in actually, I'm a human being. I am living in the world. I am a free, autonomous person. I have, and you can have faith even if you're religious. I think that's very important. I think people can. Because the politicians don't want us to feel like that. They're trying to raise that kind of feeling. So that's one way, you know?
A lot of people in the stand in the park are single people who live alone.
Mhm.
And of course it's happening in a city for me. Um, they're saying they look forward all week to the Sunday where
Mhm.
they can be, because we're exposed everywhere we go. Like when I hang up here, I'm going to go to the shop. I'm going to be again exposed to the mental side. I'm going to be surrounded by it. I'm going to stand out like a sore thumb because I'm not wearing a nappy on my face. It's like it I think it's easier. Like some people, not everyone is single. Some people have said my family kept me sane, you know,
Mhm.
because I could spend time with them. Um, I think that's why they've done such a visual thing, isn't it? Because it is hard to walk through a city like Edinburgh and feel what you're talking about. Feel like a free sovereign human being.
Yeah. It's without doubt. It's a horrendous. It's a very tragic thing to witness. I think, you know. When you think about people who lived in the Soviet Union, for example, or in any of the Eastern Bloc countries, Lithuania, Ukraine, places like that, uh, you know,
They had it for decades, didn't they?
they had it for decades, of course, and of course, but it brought out the best in those people, the people who, it brought out the worst as well, but it brought out the people who were on the good side, so to speak. It brought out the good, the human spirit in a very positive way, I think, eventually. I mean, I don't think it'll last decades. If this thing will last decades, possibly because it's different. We're in a different time of history, It's moved very quickly in 2 years, but yeah. Well, I don't know what your question was again.
Plus, the Soviet Union, for example, and Nazi Germany to a great extent, were able to hide what was going on. With this, everybody's looking, everybody knows, everybody's focused. There's nothing to hide.
But yeah, we've got all the data at our fingertips. And years ago, you wouldn't have that ability,
You just have propaganda.
Propaganda all the time. So in one sense, it's people say COVID-19 couldn't have happened without the internet, which is probably true. But of course, at the same time, it has this paradoxical effect that they don't like. Is that it's not clear cut for them. I think it's not clear cut. And more people are starting to question it. People who are triple jabbed, when they get confronted with the fourth jab, what have they got to start saying? It's like, well, there'll be a proportion of them they'll take anything. They'll take 10 jabs. They'll take 50 jabs. They'll take a microchip. They'll hook themselves up to the internet with a bloody electrical wire if they were told. They'll wear 5 masks. If Fauci says wear 5 masks, wear 5 masks, But people have limits, I think, and Bill Gates sitting there can smirk all he wants. I think you'll realise that a lot of people start developing their limits, and it'll the more it goes on, the people will start realising what their limits are, and then the game's still on. Everything's to play for, I think.
Yeah.
Dr. Bruce, it's been an absolute pleasure. I thank you so much for your time. One more time, just for anybody who might have missed it, go ahead and remind us where you can be found.
You can get me on Scott's Views YouTube channel or BitChute, and I'm on Twitter at Dr. Bruce Scott, and I've got my own website, Borderline. It's Dr. Bruce Scott. The address, you'll find it if you Google it, Borderline Dr. Bruce Scott, and I've got articles in UK Column as well, and Off Guardian, so you can find me there.
Very, very good. It was my great pleasure to meet you. Thank you, Pauline, for setting this up. Also, thanks for being here as well. And I guess I'll let you go now. It's probably, I think it's what, 7:30 or what's it, 5:30 your time?
5:30.
I've been watching the sun behind you, that little window. I've been watching the sun go down, getting dark out there. So
so I'm away to take my dog for a walk in the dark now. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. So it's been a pleasure meeting you, Aaron. It's been a great pleasure. Pauline spoke very highly about you, and it's been really great chatting with you from other side of the pond. You know, the benefits of technology.
Right.
Yeah.
Something else we
Thanks.
something else we couldn't have done, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Sue.
Very.
And thanks, Pauline, for setting it up. And we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
absolutely. Let's. I'm sure I'll have more questions. In fact, as soon as we hang up, there's going to be a question pops into my head immediately. I know it. So something I wish I would have asked you. But thank
Yeah.
you so much for your time. I really enjoyed it, and it was a great pleasure meeting you. Thank you.
No problem.
All
All
right.
Cheers.
right. Talk to
All
you
right.
soon.
Thanks
Bye.
everybody, and we'll do it again sometime soon. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
All right. So I'm just going to shut down the recording.